Thank you for having us here. My name's Tim Papandreou. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning for the San Francisco MTA. We're the all-in-one agency that manages all transportation in San Francisco. We're also ground zero for all of this work. So whether it's the sharing economy, whether it's shared mobility, whether it's apps, whatever it is, it's all ground zero in San Francisco. And it's creating a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges for us. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things before we introduce the panel on just getting your head around this idea, and then maybe thinking in the back of your mind, what's Caltrans' role in this? What are other transportation agencies' roles in this in the state? Because we're at the epicenter of it all. So California is literally having to grow this industry at the same time figure out how it fits in our whole system. So we have Emily Castor from Lyft. Can you just turn your names over so I can just quickly see your names again? I'm losing everyone's name. So Walter Rosencrantz from Car2Go, Paul Steinberg from Karma Carpooling, and Kansas Wah from San Francisco Bay Area Bike Share. We're going to hear their perspectives in a little bit about how they're tying themselves into this whole transportation system, or ecosystem as we call it, and how it all actually fits in the overall picture of improving our transportation system as we know. So this is who I am. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Most of this stuff is on Twitter, so you can just follow it through. But as we look at this, I'm going to see if it's going to work. We look at this from a perspective of the state. So what's happening in California? Well, on the left-hand side, we had AB 32 and SB 375 that led to the creation of the request for regions to create sustainable community strategies, where for the first time we linked land use, transportation, energy, and everything else together. And for the city's perspective, or at the county level, they had to really figure out what they want to do in their city, and then tie that to the transportation system. On the right-hand side, we also had the regional growth projections as well. So those who understand the whole regional housing needs assessment, that basically predicts and provides the jobs and the growth we're going to expect over the next 25 years. So we have transportation and land use for the first time really talking to each other. And we're finding out some really fun things that they're not very well connected, and there are opportunities that in areas that we can really see everybody's role work. So if you look at the state, Caltrans' role is that green, all those green lines, really the state highway system and connecting things to cities and around from cities and rural areas. And then when we zoom up into the region, we can see that there's a regional transportation network which comprises public transport and all these other pieces in there. But if you zoom into the city level is really where all of this first, last mile kind of connectivity and intra-city connectivity really makes a lot of things work. And that really is what is the underpinning of most of our transportation systems, and that's what supports our economy and our livability goals. So we're looking at our land use growth as well, where we focus our land use affects our transportation system and the outcomes of our transportation system. So that's the policy side. Here's the reality that we have right now. We have a lot of single occupant vehicles. 80% of them are empty most of the time. They're stationary. We use our cars for about an hour and a half of the day. They sit parked in a subsidized space, which is really not well use of resources. And they're 100% owned, except for a very small amount of people who are sharing these services. And for us to grow as a city and to grow our state, this model is no longer sustainable. It just doesn't work. So we've been looking at it from a perspective in our city, in San Francisco, where we're trying to create a lot of these changes, and we really need to reduce the rate and growth of single occupant vehicle trips, but also car ownership as well. That sounds socialist, but it's actually it's a market directive. In order for us to have economic competitiveness, we need to reduce the amount of car ownership in our cities because it's about physics. There's physically not enough space to move those cars around. And there's an opportunity with sharing that we could actually not only reduce the amount of vehicles, but increase mobility at the same time. So big statement here, but it's important to know what we're talking about. A big trend that's happening as well is that traditionally we've looked at transportation as I own and use my own transportation to get around. I have my car, I get around whenever I want. A car has a great opportunity for flexibility. You know, when most people talk about cars, the first thing they say in these focus groups is, I have freedom. And how do you move that freedom towards another opportunity, which is mobility and access? And that's what we're seeing happening, trending in some of the urban areas in the state, where some people are saying, I can use a choice of opportunities, whether it's car sharing or bike sharing or something else, and I can use my car for when I need my car for other trips, but not for all the time. Where we're heading really quickly is a whole new demographic coming in saying, I actually want to access a whole bunch of mobility. I don't want to own it. I don't want to park it. I don't want to deal with tickets, insurance. I don't want to do any of that sort of stuff. I want to be picked up and dropped off, or I want to be able to walk to where I want to get to and take a bus or a train, and I want to be connected the whole time. That's a big change for us. So in order for us to do that, we have to manage existing demand while managing new demand. And to do that, we have to look at our mode shift strategies. So the car and the freeway is not the all end to move around the state anymore. It's going to be the infrastructure or the platform and the services that can use that facility. Those of you who drove down to LA this weekend for a long weekend know that our system is completely oversubscribed and completely inefficient. So there's lots of opportunities there, which is the upside of that. So when we're looking at shared mobility, we're looking at 4 key areas, and we'll talk about it a little bit on this panel, is that our customers, the first time that we need to look at our users as customers. You know, it's not a given that people are going to drive their car. It's not a given they're going to take transit. We need to treat them as customers. Whether they're residents, workers, or visitors, they're going to be accessing these services. There's the mobility providers, which are here for us, you know, whether they're public providers in terms of public transport, whether they're private providers, or whether they're employee providers. There's the technology piece, which is part of this workshop today. Integrating all this technology and integrating the modes is a real big challenge for us, and it really determines whether or not people will use these services. And then the street space, the area that's near and dear to my team's heart and to your work, is how do we allocate the right-of-way effectively and efficiently to make these systems actually work? And so when we look at this, we try and define shared mobility as, in my agency, we're defining shared mobility as it's transportation provided by multiple service providers through various vehicle types, whether it's rail, bus, car, van, scooter, bicycle, etc. And those assets are shared among users. It's a big change from how we've seen transportation defined before. And here are all the players. Some of them are in front of you, but a whole bunch of players, whether it's car share, bike share, scooter share, we have all different services there. We also know that these fleets, they're either owned or operated by the public in terms of public transit, in the case of public transit, or the private sector, whether they're cars or scooters or vans, or by subcontractors who actually don't, where companies like the transportation network companies who they don't own any of the fleets, and people individually own them and they subcontract them out. So, or it's a combination of all the above. In terms of bike sharing, it's owned by the public and private sector together. So a whole new way of looking at how we utilize these resources. And so here is just a menu of some of them. I'll go over some of the quick definitions for you. But everything from public transit to jitneys is part of this whole sharing transportation system. So traditional public transit, most of you know what public transit's about. It's been around for about 150 years. SF has the oldest running publicly owned transit system. Moves a lot of people, very efficient and effective in urban core areas. I've got a bit of work to do in suburban areas, but this is where opportunities arise to optimize the services. Traditional taxis and limousines, you get into them, you either hail them on the street or you get them by an app. You pay cash or you pay with an app, it depends on what's available. With ride sharing, it comes in different flavors. There's carpooling, which is a grouping of travelers together into privately owned vehicles, typically used for commuting. There's van pooling, which is commuters travel together in a van. Some of you have van pooled here or go to work van pooling. And there's real-time ride-sharing services, which literally match drivers and passengers based on their destination through an app before the trip starts. And then there's car sharing. Susan's been working on this for decades, right? There's round-trip car sharing, what we call traditional car sharing, where you book and pay and you return the car where you picked it up from. There's peer-to-peer car sharing, which are privately owned vehicles that are not fleet-owned. There's one-way car sharing, like Walter's organization here. And there's fractional ownership car sharing, where we all individually, collectively own a vehicle and we lease it based on a third-party subscription service. So I know I'm running through these, but there's a lot to show you. There's scooter sharing as well. Scoot runs in San Francisco, which is a round-trip and one-way by the hour, smartphone-enabled scooter sharing service, which is like maybe it's the third medium between a bike and a car, and it's for those trips that make sense. So we're seeing a lot of diversity of opportunities here for services. And then we have the shuttle services, which a lot of you may know them as the Google Bus. There's the corporate regional shuttles, which are funded by employers. They pick people up and drop them off at the business. There's the local shuttles that move people around. You have them all over the state. And then there's these new open commuter shuttles, which are mimicking the private employer shuttles, but they're open to people who are willing to pay. And then we have bike sharing. We have public bike sharing, which is what's happening in the Bay Area and across the state. We have closed community bike sharing, which is on a campus. And we also now have peer-to-peer bike sharing, where people are renting out their bicycles by the minute. So, all these different things that are popping up. And last but not least, but the one that probably takes up 99% of our airtime right now, is the transportation network companies. And they're, pre-arranged trips using an app to pay and connect passengers with drivers who use their personal vehicles. The ones that you know most likely are Uber and Lyft. Emily's with Lyft today. There's Sidecar, but there's also a new company called Shuttle. Shuttle moves children around the city so that parents don't have to play soccer mom all day long. So there's a lot of these new services that are popping up. And last but not least, we have now e-jitneys, app-enabled jitney services, which are kind of in between van pooling and public transit, and we're trying to figure out how they fit in the transportation system. So a lot of definitions, a lot of services. Many of them are being used in San Francisco. We've just finished our recent survey in San Francisco, and we've found that people use taxis, they're using the TNCs quite regularly. People have tried and used car sharing much more than we thought was happening. And even with bike share as a pilot, 4% of the cities actually tried the bike share. So there's a lot of interest. And these are the figures we have for San Francisco, but our peers in San Diego, Los Angeles, and other cities around the state, San Jose, are starting to see the same things as well with these shared services. There's a lot of partnership opportunities with them, whether they're partnering directly with services to grow the market for both. And there's opportunities for special events and those sort of things. So we're starting to see that. What's interesting for us from a policy perspective is, do they meet our livability goals? Do they meet our accessibility goals? Do they meet our safety goals? All these things are new and they're emerging services. So the best thing we can do is partner with them, figure it out. Does this actually work for us, and how does it work? We know on the lower end of the spectrum that driving alone does not meet our city goals. We know on the upper end of the spectrum that walking, bicycle, and transit meets our city goals. A lot of these shared services are somewhere in the middle. It's not very clear yet, and I think there's an opportunity for us to work together to make sure that they do meet our city goals, and we're sure that they will. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is, and for you guys to think about during the day, is how do we engage in this partnership? What's the best way to move forward with this? There's the technology, there's the street space, there's all these pieces. There's some 7 core principles that we've been working on in my agency of maybe these are the right 7 to work on, whether it's focusing on very high level agreements of we agree to increase safety, we agree to increase accessibility for the disabled, we want to increase affordability of our transport system, especially now at the housing crisis that we all have across the state. We want to improve mode shift towards sustainable modes, increase the integration of the modes so they actually work together, improve efficiency of the services so we reduce our emissions and meet our climate goals, and then improve our data reporting and transparency. They're kind of like the things I want for you to think about during today. And so with that, I just want to ask the panelists just for a few minutes of their thoughts on, now that we've set the stage on this, how do you see your services fitting in the ecosystem of transportation in the urban area where you're at right now, or in the commuting corridor in the suburbs? Just what's your perspectives on this? So why don't we start with Emily and then go this way, and then I'll promise I'll change the order the other way around.
Sure, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Am I on? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Now I can hear myself. Good morning. So it's been really interesting over the last 3 years to watch our service rise from one city, our test bed in San Francisco, where you've seen it from the start, Tim, now to basically every major city throughout California, including many in the Central Valley, and certainly Los Angeles, San Diego, Sacramento. We are operating with millions of rides happening every single week on our platform. So clearly there is something that's striking a chord with consumers, both in California and across the country, about this service and the role that it plays relative to other options that commuters have had in the past. So I think the way I think about it is trying to identify what is valuable and uniquely valuable about the niche that we're able to fill, and how can those capabilities that we have that may be filling gaps that weren't being met by services in the past fill a complementary role and help advance the goals that planners have, whether at the city level or at the state level, to reduce vehicle ownership in the city. Certainly a very congested place like San Francisco with such density, there's very little need for someone to own a vehicle when they have access to transportation on demand, either in the form of ride sharing or in the form of car sharing and other services. But also in the suburbs, looking as we get farther out from the urban core, in those places where traditionally it may have been particularly difficult to offer transit on a fixed route basis, into low density communities and to places that are slightly isolated from our transportation hubs. Is there a role that services like Lyft can play in making connections, filling in those areas, those sort of interstitial spaces in the transportation system, whether it be geographically or even late at night, those times of day and off-peak periods when our system hasn't been able to meet the sort of convenience and frequency that we would like for individuals who otherwise would need to rely on personal vehicles. Because when we look at the big picture of reliance on personal vehicles across California, it's still the lion's share of the pie. Right now, Tim has sort of the best case scenario in California. I was just looking up some numbers, and I think you guys are about 27% drive alone mode share, which is fantastic for California.
Right.
But what are those 30% of people in San Francisco feeling like they need to own a car for, right?
It boggles my mind. I don't know why.
Hopefully we can take a chunk out of that and make it really easy for those people not to own cars and take up your street space and drive their cars downtown. One of the ways we can be most helpful in those dense urban contexts is really through aggregation of demand. And what I mean by that is filling the empty seats in cars so that anyone who is taking a personal vehicle is in a high occupancy vehicle. Now, when we first started out, we were just trying to figure out a way to reliably get people rides. But now we've cracked that nut. Anywhere in San Francisco, you can get a ride in 3 minutes or less on the Lyft platform, very reliably. And in fact, now there are so many people requesting rides that we're allowing passengers through our Lyft Line service to request a ride that they'll be sharing with other passengers in exchange for a significantly lower price, which helps get us closer to that goal of affordability at the same time as increasing vehicle occupancy, where now well over half of our passengers in San Francisco are requesting our shared ride product, and the majority of those are actually being matched with other passengers at the same time. In fact, 20% of them we have triple matches in a single vehicle. So we're really maxing out the number of seats that we're filling. So that's, I think, the best role that we can play in the urban context, where we're making sure that personal vehicles are fully occupied and allowing people to connect into transit hubs. And then when you get out into the lower density areas or into places like LA or San Diego, where the vast majority of people may be living in areas where they don't have walkable transit at their doorstep, we can fill sort of a more routinized role in connecting people into those networks. But I do think that there's still a lot for us to learn in sort of what role this plays in the average commuter's habits, because as you probably have seen with any new early adopter tech service, the people who start out using it are the ones who are right in the city, right? And the ones who have lots of options.
Right.
And over time, we're going to see greater and greater penetration of our service into more demographics of folks. And I think that we have a lot of work to do in getting into sort of the 30 to 60-year-old mainline commuter demographics, who are probably the ones that are maybe living in Concord or Pleasanton in the Bay Area, driving on the 580 or in the 24 and going through into San Francisco. And certainly the same thing throughout our major metropolitan areas. So so we're really interested in finding a way to collaborate with transit systems and connecting those folks into regional arterial transit networks so that folks don't have to drive on the freeways. So there are those two different kinds of niches that we can fill in the suburban and urban settings, and we're really excited to engage in those types of partnerships to do that.
Thanks, Emily. Emily's always passionate about this, so it's great to hear her speak. Walter, from the Car2Go perspective, where you have the car sharing, you're in several hubs in California and across the United States, across the world actually. And what are the experiences that you found in terms of the first last mile connection? Because that seems to be one of the strong points that many of the users that we speak with are seeing, that the car sharing offers that opportunity for those services.
Right. And some of you may not be familiar with the Car2Go model because it's relatively new. So just back up a little bit. It's a point-to-point car share system. So it allows a member to pick up a car in one part of town, take it to another part of town, end the rental, walk away, and not have to worry about returning it to its original location. Also, the system provides the ability to do a spontaneous rental. So, life happens. You miss your ride, or your ride doesn't show up. You can just pull out the app and find the nearest car and rent the car on the spot. And there's no return time or anything. So it kind of provides that flexibility. So from that standpoint, point-to-point works really well in combination with the other modes of transportation out there. For example, we have some agreements with some of the transit agencies in our markets that have parking right there at the station. So somebody can, pick up a car, take it to the transit station, into the rental, and then continue their journey on rail and vice versa. And that's worked really well. And also the ability, Emily mentioned it well also, there's times of the day where people would love to be able to take transit, but the schedules may not be convenient. We have a lot of service workers that use our system. They're taking transit into work or carpooling into work, but when they're getting off at the hours when the schedules may not be convenient for them, then they can use our system and get back. And so they're still using transit. We find that most of our members are already transit members. They're already using these alternative modes of transportation, but there are certain times when they do need that flexibility to have their own guided transportation, and that's where our system works out pretty well. Right now, we're in 30 markets worldwide. We've got over 13,500 cars in service with over a million members. So it's been well received, and again, it's one of those links in the chain that helps people get out of their personal car.
Thanks, Walter. So you're hearing a few perspectives of how these all fit together. I think it's important to note that we use the car for everything. Every single trip you can think of, the car was there, and that's what it gave flexibility. If you're not going to use a car, you need to use a whole bunch of other things that need to work really well. And I think at the same time, we need to use our existing resources more effectively, and I think that's where Karma has been a really good opportunity to figure out how do we use the existing facilities that we have and how do we optimize them. So, Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about Karma and how you guys fit into the commuting side and the carpooling side of this?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, Karma carpooling is about if you have to own a car and you're going to drive it, don't drive it alone. Share those resources, all those empty seats that we keep referring to in that vehicle. And we've recently introduced a commuter service, which is basically car sharing one way, but it's forced carpooling. So you can't drive unless there's 3 or more people in the car. And we've recently joined forces with Rick, who's going to talk at the next session, who does car sharing, city car share. And the idea is that we want to offer all of your mobility options, but we don't want you to own a car. In fact, we want to deliver an ownerless vehicle. If you own a car, we want you to share it. If you don't own a car, we want you to rent it. Rent it by a seat or rent it by the hour. The idea is that we need to reduce our dependency on automobile. And the reason why we're a little bit different, we're probably one of the smaller players in the space, is that we only go to market in metro areas where we're hand in hand with the federal government, the DOT, and all the transportation authorities. And the reason is that our mission in life is to change policy. The reason why we all drive alone is it's simply the most efficient and cheapest mode of transit in America. This is not the case where we started in Europe. We must change our policies and make hard decisions, remove free parking, remove subsidies for parking, and encourage high occupancy travel. We have built roadways since the 70s to build jobs. Now we've created a lot of jobs and we're seeing the results of that. We have high congestion at rush hour. We don't have it in the middle of the night, it's at rush hour. So we must encourage people to carpool or take other forms of alternative transportation during our peak hours. And that's really our mission in life. When we do that hand in hand with the government, we share all of our data, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we continue to experiment on ways to incentivize drivers affordably, scalably, or to change policies at a local, regional, or federal level that will encourage the habits that we want to promote in the future, which is discounts on toll roads if you carpool, but full rate if you drive alone. These are the types of big policy decisions, hard policy decisions, that we're going to have to make a big impact on the other goal I saw Caltrans has, which is to increase carpooling by 5%, to reduce by 3% our VMTs. 5% is 1 out of 20 days a week, people. That's once a month. We're asking you to park your car and take a train or ride in a carpool. That's all it takes to make a significant impact on all of our lives. Thank you.
Always the easy thing. It's always like, if you just eat fruits and vegetables, you'll lose weight, right? But it's like, but you have to do it, and you have to do it for a sustained amount of time, and you have to rethink the whole menu of options. So the food menu and the mobility menu are very similar, right? Too many carbs, too many carbs, we've got to cut those out. So a high protein diet, maybe bike sharing is part of that high protein diet. So bike sharing has grown. It actually didn't debut in California for a while. You know, the rest of the country actually, this is one of the things where California was kind of trailing behind the rest of the country, which is really not good for us. We always want to be ahead of the curve. But we've kicked it up with a vengeance, and San Francisco had a pilot over the last couple of years. Now LA is starting, and Santa Monica, and a few other cities have started, San Diego, Long Beach, all up and down the coast. I don't know if Davis has it yet, but they've got a huge bike mode share. What's the bike share piece? How does that piece of the puzzle fit in the transportation system, and how are you getting to some of these core principles that we're trying to talk about?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll get to the full answer of it, but maybe also a little back up.
Sure.
Motivate, I'm Kansas Y, I work for Motivate. We were the operators of bike share systems around the country. We operate the pilot system that's in San Francisco and down the peninsula. We also operate in 9 other markets, major cities in the US, New York, Chicago, DC, Boston, a few others. We have over 16,000 bikes on the road. We've provided trips to over 1.3 million different users. And to date, we've had over 33 million trips. We have 600 employees at Motivate. And we've recently, after this 2-year of the pilot program, which I'll talk to in a second, come into an agreement with the MTC in partnership to expand the Bay Area system 10 times its size. So from 700 bikes, we'll go to 7,000 bikes in the next couple of years. I'm the general manager for the pilot system, and it's a 700 bike system with half of those bikes in San Francisco and the other half down the peninsula to San Jose. So it was a more or less experiment in what the demand would be in smaller communities down the peninsula. So with 35 stations in San Francisco and 350 bikes, we had smaller little subsystems down with 7 stations in Redwood City, 5 in Palo Alto, 7 in Mountain View, and 16 in San Jose. Over the course of 2 years, we saw a lot of demand in San Francisco. So 90% of the trips were in San Francisco. But we had over 1 million rides, or 1 million miles ridden, 660,000 trips. We burned 49 million calories. So to get to your point, and we saw approximately 381 tons of carbon emissions removed. So, but bike sharing checks off a lot of boxes. It does all of those things. It provides an alternative for neighborhoods and cities where traditional transportation doesn't reach. So it gives people options. And as you, I think, really well eloquently pointed out, bike sharing is at the upper end of being able to make cities livable. It brings people out of cars. It provides that easy, accessible mode for them to be able to get from point A to point B. The way that bike sharing works, maybe to back up a little bit again, is that there are stations where you check a bike out and then you can return to another station just like that one at any place in the city. So the plan in San Francisco and Oakland, Emeryville, Berkeley, and San Jose is to be able to have enough bike and station density to be able to make the system ubiquitous so that you do have options wherever you're going. And so, in that way, bike sharing kind of accomplishes a lot in terms of being able to integrate with transit and provide people, the options that they need.
Great. So thank you all for that overview and how you see yourself fitting into the system. So the good and the bad thing about cars is if you want to go from point A to point B, you need basically two things. You need, three things. You need the driver's license, you need the keys, and you probably know how to drive. And you may need the car. I guess you need the car. To use these services, they need a whole different types of access to use these things. And I think the next part of this conversation is about the technology and the integration piece. And we have a whole bunch of modes of transport, but they don't really talk to each other. They don't really connect with each other, and it's very difficult for the customer who is new to a lot of these services, who's coming out of driving a car. How would they actually access these things and serve and connect to these things? And these guys have seen these slides before, but it's my little bugaboo. But basically what you need is a smart transit card. You need a transit map. You need a bike share key. You need a car share card. You need this card and that card. La 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 la. All these cards. So you end up with a really fat wallet, and not with cash, with a lot of cards, right? And so it's really we call it this smart transport dumb wallet conundrum. And many of the customers say, this is just too hard for me to do this. I cannot have 9 memberships and connect to 9 different apps and do these things all the time. I'm not going to use these services. And I may stick to one, but I'm going to stick to driving my car because it's just too difficult. And I really don't want to do this. Luckily, we have this thing called a smartphone. And it actually can integrate all these things together so that the customer can basically route where they want to go, book the service, pay for it, and then maybe get credits for doing a green thing or the right thing at the right time. And maybe they can play games and all sorts of stuff. So there's always opportunities here to integrate these modes so that we can see that you as the customer, if you're here and you want to go there, you can basically say, I'm here, I want to go there. And then all the modes and options are made available to you very simply and very easily. And whether you're time sensitive or price sensitive, you can make the determination. If it's a beautiful day, you want to use bike share. If you're in a rush, you go onto the subway if it's there. And if you need to get some few things, you might do car share or get a lift line or whatever it is that you need to do that. And if you choose the option, you can press route and go. That's really what we want to see happen. And some services are starting to pop up with that, where they're trying to integrate those modes, but there's a lot of moving parts to that. So what I want to ask the group is, how do we get to this, where you basically have mobility minutes, just like you do with your cell phone plan, and it recognizes who you are and says, hey, Tim, you have 500 city minutes. You can use them for bike share, for car share, for ride sharing, whatever it is, off you go. And it just basically tracks as you go along. That's really where we have our focus groups. That's what they say. That's what would actually entice them to move away from using their car all the time, and that maybe that's coming around the corner. But from your perspectives, most of you have you all have an app, you all have a way to access and book and pay. Some of you require an actual fob or a key. Some of you don't. But you all require a smart card or a smartphone and a credit card of some sort to make the payment. Where do you guys want to go in the next couple of years, really quickly? And then how do we get to that accessibility piece of, for those who don't have a smartphone, who don't have a credit card, how are they going to be part of this system? Big questions, but yeah. Emily, I want to go, start with you, Kansas. Just
Sure.
real quick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, mobile is the future. It's here now, but we have, Motivate is certainly interested in this, and we're looking into it deeply. It's the ease. I think fundamentally it's about ease. I think you touched on this. People should be able to easily transition from one to the other. So, without going into more detail than that, we're fully interested in exploring.
Do you think we'll go towards app-based payment for bike share and not require the fob in the near future?
I would say that it's going to happen at some point.
At some point.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul?
We have open APIs, so we've already integrated with some of these integration products like Ride Scout, who is moving towards a single payment kind of model. We've collaborated with our government agency partners who are trying to integrate multiple modes. There's really not technical limitations in the sense that we've already accomplished it with APIs. Generally, what comes down to is a legal licensing agreement, the terms and conditions that are different between different products that you have, and privacy and sharing of that data across those platforms. That's really what comes down to it. I think in the future payments, Karma, or previous name Avego, does bus systems in China and Europe. And in the future, you won't have any of these. Your smartphone just tracks where you are, and we do proximity boarding, which just measures how long you're on the bus, and that's how you get billed. And to answer your question about ladders of accessibility in Texas, in Central Texas, you get free tolls if you carpool with Karma. And when you get into those kinds of worlds where you're doing occupancy enforcement, HOV capacity, you have to deal with people who don't own smartphones or their children, and they still count. And so we issue a little $4 iBeacon, which acts as your identification, and we just track how that's moving in the network in relation to the other mobile phones. So I think it's already happening in Europe. They're much farther along with integration of payments. And I think the biggest issue is just coming to an agreement on a GTFS-like standard, like for public bus transit data, that all of the third parties would be willing to push our data into a common format.
Walter, what about with Car2Go, with the payment and access if you don't have a smartphone or a credit card? Or what are you finding? Is there demand for people who don't have access to these things? Are you hearing about that? How does it work?
It's interesting. Almost all of our transactions take place on a smartphone.
Okay.
So we have a system that offers both either an all-phone capable rental system or a member access card. And what we find is most of the people are still using the smartphone to access the system. So I do think certainly things are going to move into more of an integrated system where all of the options become available. And I heard in another conference that kind of the holy grail is when somebody is perfectly comfortable and trusts the system enough just to wing it. That's where the kind of the ideal thing is, to where it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm here, I need to go there, all right, done. And I think we're moving that direction pretty quickly. When you think about a couple years ago, some of these services didn't even exist. And the progression that's taken place just within the last 2 or 3 years, another 2 or 3 years from now, I think we're going to be on to another topic because it's already going to be solved. So
I hope so.
yeah. Oh, and also to that point, I think that also does open up a lot of opportunity for people that don't have current banking systems in that, because right now our system is tied to a credit card.
Right.
But if there is an integrated system where it's like a credit-based system, then you can get other nonprofits, whatever, helping certain populations if they want to, and then it just becomes a big pool of transportation options.
Yeah, and Emily, with Lyft, I mean, how are you guys? That's one of the big issues that you've noticed in your deliberations with cities. Let's not talk about my city, but the accessibility piece, the affordability, the ability to access without a smartphone or an app.
Well, let me tackle the whole ball of wax.
Yeah, go for it.
It is really somewhat inextricable, and this whole ecosystem is taking shape extremely rapidly. So over the last...
Do you want to tap your microphone?
There we go. Thanks. I know I talk loud, but not quite loud enough. So this ecosystem is taking shape really, really rapidly. And as I've been going around the country talking to transit agencies over the last few months very intensively, I'm starting to hear the same themes every single place that I go. And it's basically like the fruition of your vision, Tim, that I've been hearing from you for the last few years. This slide has been out there in your deck for a few years, and it seemed pie in the sky a few years ago.
And I was
to
told
me,
about
it
that.
really doesn't now, because a few important things are happening at once. I think one really critical element is the movement toward mobile ticketing systems for transit agencies. The fact that, as you showed up there, LADOT and so many other transit agencies now are dipping their toe in the water with smartphone app-based fare media. That is bringing them into our world, right? Once you can pay for your transit with a software-based system, then we can integrate our APIs into that system, and we can communicate in the same language. So, Lyft's API can be integrated, and I think the first set of possibilities of what we could do is just to show in a trip planning function how far away is the nearest Lyft ride, how much would it cost, click through and link right to the app and request a ride. But then there are a few steps beyond that that are actually quite close as well, where within a few months, maybe you don't even need to leave and actually download the Lyft app at all. Maybe there could be a third-party app like Ride Scout through which you could go through the entire transaction and request and book and pay for your complete trip right at the beginning, and have all of the reconciliation between the different services be handled on the back end, fairly invisible to the end user. And right now, from what I've heard, this is something that's maybe on the near-term horizon for all of our services working together. So I think that's really exciting. To your point about accessibility, especially for those who don't have credit cards, I had a fascinating conversation with the TAP team at LA Metro a few weeks ago, really digging in with them to try to understand how could we architect a system that would allow someone who doesn't have a credit card to be able to use their cash value that they add on a TAP card to be a source of payment on a software-based system like ours.
Right.
I'll tell you what, it's not easy.
No.
I learned a lot in that session, and so there are a lot of technical barriers that remain on the public sector transit agency side.
It's a whole bunch of dirty laundry we don't want to even get into.
I know I don't need to tell you
Yeah.
that, or any of the good-hearted Clipper folks in the
Oh my
room.
goodness.
Some of these legacy systems are going to take a little bit of time to catch up to the point that they're really interoperable with systems like ours. But the good news is, there are systems coming online with some of the open transit systems that are going to allow us to start proving out the concept and then bringing other operators online as we become more capable. And I think once you can get away from sort of kiosk-based systems where someone has to tap into the fare gate, you could have interoperability and sort of a transit account that someone could add cash value onto and then redeem across multiple other services that have payment relationships.
Right. I think one of the things that we're talking about is the idea of a kayak for urban transportation. If those of you who use kayak, you can book your hotel, your car, and your plane all in one system. They may move you to a website, they may not, but they can book it all together. I think that's where we hear that the customers would like us to go in that direction. I'm really happy to hear what's happening there. For those that will not own a smartphone or that cannot get a credit card, I know with bike sharing there's some pilots that we're doing for low-income users through a third-party community bank or a community trust where they can actually access these services. Are any of you guys looking at that sort of thing at all? Is there a bridge right now? Will this go away in a few years' time? How are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. We've experimented with a number of different programs, credit unions, et cetera. I think for the expansion in the Bay Area, we're going to kind of find the best practice and use a Lifeline program as well. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it still kind of remains to be seen what the golden ticket is, but we're completely dedicated to finding that.
All carpool trips can be free. It's up to the driver. So you can ride for free. You don't need any money.
Okay. Walter?
Yeah, I would just echo the comments about it's certainly an interest to us. Our platform right now is kind of still built on the credit card payment system and the smartphone, but we are certainly interested in, as Emily mentioned, as other technologies and the transit agencies in that improve their technology, coming up with a way to service those customers.
Right.
And the payment methods that we accept on our platform are becoming increasingly diverse. So we used to just have credit card. Now we have PayPal and Google Wallet and Apple Pay as well. And I don't think it's inconceivable that could be flexible enough to include forms of payment that, for example, looking at the model in the developing world, like in Africa, in
Right.
East Africa, nobody has bank accounts, but they have these mobile payment systems where individuals are able to add value
text, right.
and then transfer it very easily without having access to traditional credit. So there may be things like that we can be inspired by to make it easier for folks.
Excellent.
And I think partnership with banks or credit unions, particularly with some kind of backing from government agencies that want to encourage the participation of low-income and disadvantaged communities would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think we can look at the airline industry as a benchmark of how they've progressed with this. A few years ago, you had to get a printed out ticket at the counter. You could soon print it from your website at home with your own printer, and now you can have the mobile ticket on your phone and just scan through. So there are opportunities then. I think we're going to need to leapfrog a little bit as well from the public sector side, because we do have those legacy issues with our so-called smart cards. So last but not least, the area that is really near and dear to my heart, and I think to your hearts as well, is curb space, street space allocation. Most of you here are transportation street space allocation experts, and how do we optimize the street for these shared services to actually work? Here is Market Street many years ago. We did this analysis where we showed that in 2004, we had 3 cars for every 1 bicycle on Market Street, and there was a lot of cyclists on the system. They were getting injured, transit was stuck, and there's a lot of cars that were lost. They didn't know why they were on Market Street, but they were lost. I'm saying they were lost, but they weren't. They were like still driving down Market Street. And so we basically looked at the street and said, it's about the street space allocation. That's what we can do as an agency to try and create that signal of which modes we prefer for efficiency purposes. And I use this diagram to explain to some of our policymakers that, you know, what looks like a long line of cars and what's called congestion, there are 9 people in those 9 cars. And next to them is this small little group of 1 car space, but there's about 21 people on bicycles. And oh, by the way, in the next lane, there's a couple of 100 people in a bus and a tram and a train. And, you know, we need to think about everybody has equal access to the space and not just the people who are in cars. When we changed the street, we saw that just with striping and painting, we saw that there was 1 car now for every 3 bicycles. So we flipped the street just by changing the design. And this is the design footprint that we're using for our streets in San Francisco now. This is also part of that National Association of City Transportation Officials, which your director, Malcolm Dougherty, endorsed as the right way to do urban design, street design guidelines for cities. I think this is where Caltrans can really be at the forefront and think about how do we allocate space in the right way at the state level, but also work with cities at the local level so that these shared use providers who do need curb space, they do need to pick up and drop off people in a safe way, are able to access these streets in the right way. And most of the city streets are owned by the cities. Some streets are owned by the state. So there is an opportunity there to have a cooperative policy framework, because these guys are coming really soon. And so when these guys come into the play, we're going to really have to think about it in a much more comprehensive way. And in a smart city, we actually have true partnerships. We partner with all of these different services, and whether it's bike share, car share, ride sharing, or commuting or carpooling, to create those spaces in our city so that we can see these working in a more effective way. And here are some examples where we actually have integrated scooter share, bike share, the bicycling and transit and taxi service all on 1 corridor. We closed off Market Street to private cars last month, because for safety reasons we needed to do that, but it's also a signal that we're listening to what the changes are happening in the demographics. So with you guys who are the providers of these services, what's the 1 or 2 things that you want to ask or ask the people here in the room who are, most of them are transportation providers, policymakers, engineers, planners, elected legislative staff, etc. What do you need from the state to be a partner in this ecosystem of shared transportation?
Specifically with respect to the physical infrastructure
Yeah.
of the streets.
Yeah.
I commend San Francisco, and now it's great to see LA with their new mobility plan moving toward this vision of streets. And Lyft is very supportive of that vision of mobility in cities and really taking back streets for people, to be people-friendly and pedestrian-friendly and bike-friendly, and to be accommodated to a world in which fewer people will own cars. Right? So we're really supportive of that, and we were glad to be supportive of the Safer Market Street initiative, where we actually worked collaboratively with the MTA to agree to have our vehicles no longer be picking folks up in those areas where it's dangerous on Market Street. So partnering with cities that are making those kinds of decisions and with the states, as you reimagine your infrastructure, come ask us how our system is operating in your infrastructure and where we're hitting up against pain points, and tell us about pain points that you observe with those operating on our platform, and allow us to work together to try to find ways that'll provide the best, safest, smoothest experience for drivers and passengers on our systems. So we really do have that same goal. Like, for example, for us, it was never efficient to pick people up on Market Street. It was always the least safe, most frustrating place for people who are trying to get Lyft rides in San Francisco to get picked up, because inevitably they could get caught in some, loop around a one-way
Right.
street and get there 10 minutes later than they were supposed to. And so by having that mutual agreement and setting up the technology in our system to communicate those different constraints to people through our product, we can make it easier and easier for our goals to be met and for the cities to be met.
Great.
I would agree. It's a partnership. Our model's unique in that for us, it's a parking access issue. With the free-floating model, it's not necessarily having a dedicated parking spot that the car lives in. With our system, it's having the ability to park kind of open access, just like any other member of the public would park. And parking, what we've experienced, is a very emotional thing in a lot of communities.
Oh, yes.
So it's just working with us on that, achieving some type of balance there. In the long term, car share, depending on the model you're looking at, there's a lot of studies on traditional car share. It removes a lot of cars from the public right away. And the initial studies that or research that shows one-way car share is very similar. So long term, it just removes cars from the transportation system, but it's kind of getting over that hump of managing that parking supply.
In the case of carpooling, you're generally dealing with suburbanites moving into an urban market for the workday or vice versa. And so these are generally the convenient places to start and end are at park-and rides where you have parking capability out in the network, or we have a great partnership with your own agency, SFMTA, where carpoolers get access to carpool rates at SFMTA parking garages if that's their origin heading out. But by proving occupancy, we direct people in and out of places where there's convenient parking. If that's how you're origining from, like you're out in a suburb, you can be on a park and ride, or at a BART station as an example. So generally infrastructure, the only place where the pickup comes into play is we do quite a bit of work in casual carpooling kind of space, and this is where organic carpooling does require a safe curb to pull over and pick someone up. And we have experimented in partnership with Contra Costa Transportation Authority, the city of San Ramon, and with the county connection, the bus fleet, to convert over some bus stops into legal pull-over carpool pickup spots during off hours when the bus isn't there. So I think more experimentation in those places where maybe there isn't a convenient place to park and meet, where you need curb space. We don't have that particular problem in San Francisco because 9% of our trips are crossing a bridge. These aren't people cutting across the downtown market. They either live in the city, they're parked at an SFMTA garage, or they're out in the suburbs and they're going to park at a garage. So our issue on curb space really is more in a suburban market where you have plenty of curb access. It's just more the permitting and the logistics of making that legal pullover space.
Paul, I thought you were going to say that you want to carpool on the bridge. That's what Caltrans could do for you. Okay. Kansas.
Sure. Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is that you can see here, this is a great example of the kind of efficiency that bike share has. I mean, in the course of taking 3 car parking spaces, we've provided for 19 or 23 bikes. I think that says a lot. I think the other bigger issue that always comes back whenever I talk about bike sharing and really with anyone within the industry, cities included, state agencies as well, is livability of streets, safe streets. So we're talking about making cities smarter. We're talking about them being more enjoyable places to be able to move about. Bike sharing can help with that significantly. We're talking about a more enjoyable trip. We're talking about something that's better for the environment, something that's better for your health. I think it does all of that. Right. So I think, with the street design that you threw up and the NACTO guidelines, I think those are taking all those planning ideas into mind. And I think that is the kind of direction that our cities are headed. We're seeing new industries, new businesses promoting bicycling as a real viable alternative, and normalizing it, which I think is a really key component to the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, as you can see, we could talk about this forever because there's so much going on. So, Susan, I'm not sure if we have any time for questions. We don't, but we'll be here throughout the morning and the day that you can come in and talk to us. Just closing, I just want to say thank you to Professor Susan Shaheen for organizing this and bringing us here. And here are my contact details. Feel free to contact me if you need anything that we've just shown. And really, I think it's an exciting time for Caltrans, and I really look forward to seeing some good things happen. So thank you very much.